Good morning. Thanks for tuning in to our Fine Arts playlist here at the Wayne County Extension Office, and I appreciate you tuning into this channel overall. I'm live from the clay studio at the moment and wanted to demonstrate tea light candle holders. This one will specifically be a miniature jack-o'-lantern since Halloween is approaching, and what I'm basically going to do is create a vase on the pottery wheel, and we'll of course walk you through the steps on how to do that, followed by the other details like the face and any kind of carvings and lines that you can create using a stylus, which is this tool right here. I will be using other tools, but this one primarily just to show how handy this is when it comes to sculpting. I personally feel like I have better control with it than I do with other tools, and feel like you will as well. But I will explain that more when the time comes on how to use that. But since I haven't made this piece yet, I just wanted to quickly sketch out how it will look. Now, if you can imagine just a simple vase with a wide base and how it tapers into a smaller rim, just visualize that. And I'm just going to quickly sketch that in to show you what I mean. Okay, so I will be creating a piece that looks similar to this, and after the clay has had enough time to dry, I will then sketch in the face with the stylus. So just be thinking of a face you want to sketch out, and I would also encourage you to do that on paper, just to have an idea in your mind before doing that in the clay. But after you get the face drawn in, okay, then you will be using those tools to do the cutouts as well as any other kind of carving you want to do. And this will be one side of it, but on the back side of it, if you can picture this as the back, you will need a cutout like that, so that you can put that tea light candle in there. This cutout, will be about 2 inches wide. Tea light candles are 1.5 inches typically. And of course, you'll want to make this hole even wider than that as you factor in the shrinkage that takes place when the clay dries and after it's fired. So about 2 inches roughly is fine, but the back side of it will have this cutout. This side of it will have the face. Okay, so in the next clip, I will show you how that's done on the pottery wheel, and I will then demonstrate the other steps as you finish it up. So stay tuned. So at this point, we're ready to make the vessel, or what will be the container. And basically, it's going to be a vase. It's going to have a wide base, and it's going to taper into a neck, just as I had shown how the form looks in the introduction. So I'm going to keep this as simple as I can for those of you who are not familiar with this process. To those of you beginners who have never worked on the pottery wheel before, I will condense this down in the best way that I can, and we'll explain it more thoroughly in person whenever I'm assisting you. But what this starts with is what is known as centering. So if you don't have it centered, then the rest of the steps that follow are going to be very complicated. You're not going to be able to hold the piece still. So that's the first thing that we need to do, is center the piece, or to center the ball of clay. I'm going to be working from a clay that's about 5 pounds. It's about the same size that I would normally use to make coffee mugs from. And the first thing that I need to do is get a sponge, get it wet. I have 2 buckets here, one for tools, one for water. And I'm going to turn the wheel on, and I'm going to get the surface wet. Doesn't need to be soaking wet, it just needs to have moisture on it because clay will stick to the moisture. And I'm gonna throw it down as shown, okay? Shake it around, make sure that it's on there good, and push down on it if I need to. And I'm gonna turn it on at a pretty quick speed, and I'm gonna center it up. Now, as a review to those of you who have done this, be sure that you lean into it with your body weight until the ball of clay is still. And to those of you who are beginners, you're not relying on the strength that is in your arms and your shoulders, because this requires more strength than you think it will. So you're using your body weight to lean into it. And once I get it into this dome-like form, I can then begin to open it up. Now I have to put a hole in the center, and I'm not gonna go directly into the center straight down. I'm gonna come off to the side, and I'm gonna form a little groove like that to where it looks like a tire or donut or a circle. And I am gonna keep my, well, let me back up for a second. My dominant hand is gonna be forming that hole, and my other hand is gonna be on the side. Now I'm right-handed, so my right hand is gonna be forming the hole, and my left hand is gonna be bracing it on the side, so that when it gets off center, I'll be able to nudge it back into the center. Okay, so form a hole. It's gonna look like a funnel when you're looking at it straight from, when you're looking at it from this direction. Okay, and I'm gonna slow the wheel down because the clay will become weaker as it gets more wet, and it will not be able to hold itself together if the wheel is going too fast. So we're gonna gradually slow it down. And what I'm doing is, as shown in the first step, my supporting hand is on the side and my dominant hand is on the inside of that hole, and I am slowly pulling out like that. Okay, and I'm widening out the piece. And at this point, I'm going to cone it in at the top, like so. And then I can begin the part that involves lifting it up. And in pottery terms, that's called throwing, which again means lifting. That's what makes the piece taller. And we have to compress the wall with both hands, this being the wall, and slowly pull up with our hands parallel to each other until we get it to the thickness that it needs to be. And I am going to get it no thinner than 1/4 of an inch. I may even go to 1/2 an inch. But right now the wall is thicker than I want it to be. Now I started out by forming a groove at the bottom, as you can see, and that is going to allow my hands to lift something. It's going to allow a space for my hands to lift against as I do the pulling. And with the sponge, I am going to compress the wall with my other hand on the inside. And again, they're directly parallel from each other as I'm pulling up and as I'm compressing that wall. And once I reach to the top, I'm going to start again at the bottom, maybe do it a couple more times, however many times it takes until you get that wall to the appropriate thickness. Now I don't want it too thin because it becomes too fragile when the clay dries. It will break apart more easily. And then when you start to go onto the step that involves cutting those shapes out, then it's going to be easier to collapse. So I would recommend about 1/2 inch. Any less than that, 1/4 inch is doable, but no thinner than that. So I'm going to cone it in at the top, as I showed a moment ago. And again, the bottom is wider and the top is going to be more narrow. So I'm going to compress more at the top like that with both hands. And squeeze in more as I get to the top. And as I said, it looks like a vase. I just wanted to widen out the base a little bit more. And you know, yours will not look like mine. You know, everybody's will look a little bit different, and that's what's going to make it unique. But in general, just keep in mind that the base will need to be wider than the top will need to be. So the rim is wobbling at the top, and I am going to take my needle tool and cut that off. Like that. And take this wooden tool, clean up the base, clean up that clay that is flared out at the bottom from when I started centering that ball of clay. That's just going to make the base look more clean. Nice and round. Take the sponge, smooth it out some more. I'm just giving the top a little pinch so that the rim is rounded off. And now it's ready for what you're going to do in the next step. Now I'm going to point out that I cannot do that at this point because the clay is too wet. So it needs several more hours of drying time to where it gets to what is known as the leather hard stage before you can do any more detail. So in this case, we're going to do the cutouts for the face, and it may be another 24 hours before I get a chance to do that. Now, if you're going to wait a full 24 hours, I would at least put a plastic bag over it and let it sit overnight, and then remove that plastic bag of the morning and let it sit for several more hours before you start doing that. But either way you look at it, it's going to take many hours before you can get to that point. So In the next clip, I will demonstrate how to cut out the shapes when the clay is leather hard, and we'll continue from there. So stay tuned. Okay, so the clay is now in the leather hard stage, which basically means that there is still moisture inside of it, but at the same time, it isn't too soft to the point to where it's going to collapse in your hands. It's just hard enough to the point where you can hold it and work from it. You can still attach pieces to it. You can still carve from it, but it is also not bone dry. Now, if it was bone dry, I would be very limited on what I could do. I could still do some carving, although it would be more difficult at that point because the clay is harder to carve, it's harder to cut into. But if it was bone dry, I could not attach pieces to it. I could not, therefore, do any kind of hand building. So it needs to be in this stage for doing any kind of work like that. But for this particular project, it is as I said, it's a candle holder and basically a miniature jack-o'-lantern. And as I had demonstrated with the drawing or the sketching, you are going to start out by doing the same kind of technique, really, only using a sculpting tool. And this is a stylus, for those of you who didn't know that. It's just a tool with 2 ball points. And we're going to sketch this face in before we cut it out. Now, there are 2 different sizes to the ball points. I call them ball points, but that's what they are. And you have a larger one. You also have a smaller one. I like to use the larger one first to rough out the sketch, and then use the smaller one on the other end to fine-tune the sketch, and then I will use a cutting knife to cut those out. So, as I had shown you with the examples on how to draw those out, just to review there, I just wanted to show you that. I'm going to mimic that in the best way I can, or at least something similar. You know, be as creative as you would like with the facial details. But at the same time, I also encourage you to cut shapes or to draw shapes that are going to be easy to cut out. So I'm going to use the end to sketch that out. Okay, it's going to look like that. When you use the smaller points to fine-tune those shapes, you'll see that they're more refined. And draw in the rest of it. There are a lot of similarities between these 2 mediums, between clay and drawing, more than you think. Because as shown, as I'm demonstrating now, there is some sketching involved. And you're using that tool, as I said, in the same way as you would a pencil when sketching on paper. You know, you're just relaxed with your hand, you're relaxed with your wrist, you're just moving it back and forth like that, and that allows you to create more graceful curves in your drawing and straighter lines, rather than just carefully and slowly drawing that in. Don't cut in too deep at this point. Just, sketch out the outline. If you mess up, you want to make the eyes bigger, for instance, then you can widen those out like that. All that unwanted stuff that you cut out, all the unwanted lines, they're going to be cut out anyway. Or in other words, if you did widen these eyes out, and that's what I'm choosing to do at this point, those lines that you first sketched in, those are going to be cut out anyway when you cut out the eyes. Now, if you have a needle tool, you can cut these shapes out using one of those, or you can also use a knife. I said early on that I would be using a knife, but I just wanted to say that you don't just have to limit yourself to a knife. If you move a needle tool in the same fashion or the same direction as I had just demonstrated with the stylus, you can eventually cut those shapes out. It's like carving a pumpkin, only it's really more forgiving just because clay is that way. It's just more, it's a softer surface to be working from as opposed to how hard the surface is on a pumpkin. But you're cutting it out in the same way. As far as first drawing out those details and then, cutting out the same kind of shapes. And I'm just demonstrating a simple example here. You can be as complicated as you would like with it. Again, as long as you are drawing shapes that are easy enough to cut out. So we're going to do the same thing on this side. If you need to use the stylus again to make that a little bit deeper, go for it. Now, I know the top is narrow. It may be hard to get those pieces out at this time, but we're going to cut a hole in the back to remove those because you also need a hole in the back to put the candle anyway. So refine those shapes as you go. And you know, there's only so much you can do when the clay is this wet. As the clay dries, you can continue to do more refining with the stylus and other tools to clean it up, make it look smoother. And you know, whatever else that you need to do before completing it. And I have decided that I don't want this mouth to be as wide as it is. So I'm only gonna make the corners of the mouth meet up to where about the ends of the eyes are down here on these outside corners. Now, if you wanted to add teeth, draw those in too. And then just cut around those. Hopefully my camera's in focus. I have to tap the screen every now and then to allow for that. Sometimes it wants to get off focus and get blurry. Now, the more teeth you put in this mouth, or in the one that you're working from, you know, the more careful you're going to have to be with the cutting so that you don't push or add too much pressure to those teeth, because they will cave in. And it's a lot harder to fix those once you've cut them out. Just keep going back and forth between those, both kinds of tools. And many of you will be familiar with these tools that I'm using, but if you're just tuning in, if this is your first time learning about these things, you know, you can get a variety of tools like this that are designed just for clay use with the metal hooks on them. And sometimes, you know, there is a needle on the other end. It just depends on, you know, whatever style or technique you're focusing on, and just a variety of tools that you can get that will work more conveniently than others depending on your focus or whatever it is that you're designing. Or in other words, what kind of detail that you're focusing on. Just keep moving the tools back and forth. Clear away all the little pieces that are on it as you're cutting those shapes away. Be gentle with the tool, just, barely let it touch the clay as you do the scraping and the carving and the and the refining at this point. And on the back, I am just going to sketch in a hole to cut out, and it's going to be about 2 inches wide. I'm just roughly guessing 2 inches. After you've measured 2 inches long enough or have worked with measurement, you just kind of have an idea of what's 2 inches and what's 3 and what's 4 and whatever. It doesn't have to be precise. It just needs to be wide enough to where you know that a tea light is going to fit inside of this. Most tea light candles are 1.5 inches wide. And there will be shrinkage to factor in as far as that goes when it comes to the clay drying. And when it is fired, the clay will shrink a little bit, but it won't shrink that much. I mean, not on a piece this size. I'm going to grab a knife real quick. Just to show you what one looks like. That's what I'm going to be demonstrating from. Just to show you how the knife works. and just clean out the inside. You know, all those pieces that broke off from the face that you cut out. And clean out the hole, or make the hole look, you know, smoother, more crisp. Which is all also part of the refining process. Now, if you're not sure how wide that is, when in doubt, yes, please measure it, you know, just to make sure that it is wide enough for a tea light candle to fit inside. If it's about 2 inches, then you're in good shape. But if you cut this out to where it's 1 inch wide, it's gonna be harder to put that tea light candle in there, just because of the shrinkage that the clay goes through during the drying and the firing process. But, you know, measure the width of it if you feel like it'll help you. And since we're about 25 minutes into this video, to keep it from being too lengthy, I'm going to stop here on this clip. There is more that I want to do to this. I want it to dry out more. I want to refine it more. I want to take a paintbrush and smooth out these edges just to make the lines look more smooth and just to clean it up overall, and also use a wet sponge for that. I could real quick show you how a brush works. I don't want to get this too wet right now, but when you move back and forth with the brush like that on each edge, you'll see how that smooths it out and cleans it up. Same goes with the sponge. I always like to brush first and then do the sponging like that. Okay. All right, I'm going to continue working, and when this is to my liking, when I finish sculpting and doing any kind of detail that I feel like it needs, I will show you more in the next clip. So stay tuned. So after spending a couple of more hours on this, I just wanted to show you how it looks after using the stylus tool and the other tools that I demonstrated with. Most of the time I used the stylus to create these lines that you see in here. It just comes to show how handy that tool is. You can use that most of the time for what you're doing. as far as sculpting goes, or at least I do. I mostly use a stylus when creating lines and undercuts, and I use the hooks to make those undercuts deeper, but most of the time I'm just using the stylus. It's such a handy tool. But anyway, you know, this extra detail is optional. You can just leave this piece with just the cutouts, you know, with the walls smooth and with no additional detail to them. But the sculptor in me just has a hard time leaving something plain, so I, you know, chose to add these other details in there just for extra pizzazz, you know, just to give it some more flair. And at this point, I'm just continuing to refine it. I'm giving it a polished look using this microfiber towel. You can get these at Dollar Tree. They're very easy to come by. It's the same kind of towel that you would use to clean cars with. And I'm just lightly buffing that out. And I will be putting a glaze on this, but this just helps to make it look more complete. And I also wanted to mention that at this point, or at least when the clay is, you know, more wet, you can do some hand building to it. I'm a hand builder by nature. I do that with every piece that I make. But with this, it was more minimal. The only area that I did some hand building was just on the mouth on this side, simply because I created a weak spot. I cut the mouth too close to the eye, and the wall was a little bit too thin there anyway, so I needed to add more clay just to thicken it up to make it stronger. And as I was doing that, I did raise an area here at the corner of the mouth, which was not my original intention, but at the same time, it just, you know, gives it a more interesting look. But that was just mainly a way to reinforce that area just to make the clay stronger, or to make it less fragile. So as you can see with the cutout on the back, I have cleaned that up as well. And, you know, I was using a wet sponge to do a lot of that at the time, but buffing this out just, you know, helps to finish that up. Now, in the next clip, this will be finished and it will have a glaze on it, and I will demonstrate how it functions with the tea light candle. And then we will conclude for the day. I appreciate you tuning in, and we will catch you then. So this is the moment we've been waiting for. It's the final product, and I wanted to give you a close-up look at it before we conclude the video for today. This has been glazed, as I had mentioned in the last clip. I had mentioned I would do that, and it has also been fired for the last time. And I wanted to also review certain things I had mentioned early on. When you're making a piece that's going to contain something, in this case it's the tea light candle, you always want to create your pottery or start out by making it wider than whatever it is it's containing. So the tea light candle in this case is 1.5 inches wide. So I didn't measure the width of the base as 1.5 inches. I had to factor in the shrinkage that takes place when the clay is drying out and also when it's being fired. So I started out by making the base about 2 3/4 inches, and you can stick to 3 if you want a good round number. And that shrunk down to about 2.5 inches. So there is still some wiggle room in that hole for the candle to go in. So always keep that in mind when you're making pieces that are meant to contain something. So there's the hole in the back. I'm going to slide the candle in and turn the lights off and show you how this works, just to show the ambiance it sends. And there we have it. Guys, thank you so much for tuning in to this tutorial. I hope that you found it to be helpful. I really do appreciate you watching these videos and look forward to catching you another time. Thanks again.